So straight up, the blurting method is a study technique that can help you spot the gaps in your understanding so that you can go back and study those gaps. Now, why does this matter? Because it makes absolutely no sense to study what you already know. The most effective and efficient study methods focus on what you don't know. Does that make sense? Hi, I'm Katie Azevedo. I'm a private executive function coach who teaches students and professionals strategies to learn and work better. You can find me on schoolhabits.com as well as here, and here. So as I said, the blurting method is a simple strategy that helps you separate what you know from what you don't know so that you don't waste your time studying the wrong things. The blurting method is an awesome strategy to use either at the beginning of a study session or at the end of a study session, or at the beginning of your entire study process, which might happen over several days, right? And the end of that entire multi-day study process. And that's because the beginning and the end of a study session or of a whole study process is the ideal time to figure out what you know versus what you don't know. So in other words, let's say it's Monday and you have a test on Friday. Then the blurting method would be awesome to use on Monday to say, okay, what is it that I don't know? And what is it that I need to study? And then you would use it again on Thursday night before your test to figure out, okay, are there any more gaps in my understanding? Also, if you are familiar with the Feynman technique, I have a video tutorial and a blog post on the Feynman technique. I will leave those linked below. But step 3 of the Feynman technique is perfect to use the blurting method. Now, real quick, the Feynman method has 4 steps. Number 1, choose a topic to study it. Number 2, teach the topic to a child. Number 3, identify the gaps in your understanding and go back and study those gaps. And then number 4, summarize, simplify, and organize your material. This video is not about the Feynman technique, it is about the blurting method. But step 3 is to figure out the gaps in your understanding and then study those gaps. And that's where you can use the blurting method. Okay, so how do we use the blurting method to study? It's simple, really. Now, I'm not saying it's easy, but the steps are simple. And the reason I say it's not easy because the blurting method is an active recall strategy. And active recall can honestly get kind of intense. But I've said this before, and I'm gonna say it a million times more. Active recall is the only study method that's legitimate. It's the only way to get information outside of your brain to inside of your brain. And if you're using any study method besides active recall, then unfortunately you're not actually studying. You might just be, rereading your notes and flipping through your textbook and things that feel like studying. But if it's not slightly intense, okay, and you're not using active recall, then it's not really a study method. Hopefully at this point you are familiar with what active recall is. If not, my active recall tutorial is in the description box. So right now I'm going to give you the world's most simplest summary of what the blurting method is, and then so that you can fully understand how to use it, I'm going to break down each of those steps. So here is the blurting method in a nutshell. You pick a topic and you write down everything you possibly can think of on that topic. That's the blurt. And then when you're done, you look at your blurt. It's gonna be so weird. I'm gonna say that word so many times throughout this video, but you look at your blurt and you compare your blurt to your actual notes in the actual textbook and you see what's missing. Now to sum that up without, laughing about the word blurt, you blurt everything out of your head about a topic, and then you look at your paper, and then you look at your notes in your textbook, and you compare the two and you say, what am I missing? Or what did I get wrong? And then you go study that. Simple enough, right? Maybe. But let me break down the blurting method into a few steps so that you know you're doing it right, and so that when you're done with this video, you can use it, right? Because I am so happy that you are watching this video, but if you're not gonna take action on the strategies that you learn, then that's silly. So step 1 of the blurting method is to get your notes in order. The blurting method works best when you are organized. Now, before you begin the blurting method, you want to look at your notes and you say, are they complete? Are these good? Are these going to help me when it's time to compare your blurt to your final notes? If you get to that comparison step at the end and your final notes aren't even something that's helpful, then the blurting method as a whole isn't going to be that helpful to you. So gather all your notes, whether they're on the computer and some of them are in your folders. Just make sure you have what you could consider like an ultimate answer key to check your blurt against. You might need to get your textbook, print out your class notes if you want everything paper and half of it's, on the computer. But the last thing you want to do when you sit down to do the blurting method is to say, oh wait, like I don't have my things. Do that ahead of time. Step 2 is to choose a topic. Like, what are you gonna be blurting about, right? So obviously, your topic is gonna align with whatever it is that you're studying, but you pick one topic at a time. So yes, if you're studying for a test with a lot of things on it, you may choose to use the blurting method to study some of the harder concepts. Okay, you don't have to use it to study every single thing that's on the test, because right, we change our study techniques based on what we're learning and based on our familiarity with the material. So maybe you're going to use the blurting method to study like 10 of the concepts on your test. So for example, if your test is on the French Revolution in the 18th century, then maybe you start with Napoleon, or maybe you start with the storming of Bastille, but it's one thing. And then step 3 is you write down, or you blurt everything you possibly can on the subject. I really recommend using the blurting method on paper and not on something digital. If you are physically able to write, okay, with your hands, I really suggest that this is the way that you go. If you have to do something different, then that's your situation, right? But you write, let's say, Napoleon on the top of your paper, and then you just like let the floodgates open. Everything you possibly can think of about Napoleon, you would put that on the paper. It doesn't matter the order, the sequence, it doesn't matter if it's messy, it doesn't matter if it's fully coherent, it doesn't matter if you think you're totally right, because at the end you're gonna have the final step of the blurting method is to look at your blurt and to be like, oh, am I right or am I wrong? But I don't want you to hold back on blurting something out because you're unsure of a date. Excavate absolutely everything you possibly can out of your head onto that piece of paper. If it's a smaller topic, you just might need one sheet of paper. If it's a bigger topic and you write larger and that's just the way that you are and you're kind of like visual all over the place, you might need more than one piece of paper. You can do this on a whiteboard too. So when I say, you know, I want you to do this by hand, it doesn't have to be on a piece of paper. It can be on an iPad with an Apple Pencil. It can be on a whiteboard. What I'm saying is I don't want you to type. Okay, and that takes us to the 4th step, which is to compare your blurt. I'm sorry. I can't really say that word with a straight face, and I'm not sure why. Blurt. Okay, you compare your blurt to your notes or to your textbook. And this is where the magic of the strategy kicks in. Because if you think about it, when you are writing out your blurt and you're trying to excavate everything out of your head, you're not looking at your notes, right? And that's what makes it active recall, because active recall means you try to come up with information, recall it, without looking at your notes, without looking at a textbook, okay? So now is the time where you have to check your understanding and see if you were right. Now for this step of the method, you're gonna be looking for 2 things: information that you missed or information that you got wrong. And that's why I said during the blurt, if you're not totally sure that you're accurate or not, I want you to write it down anyway, because you're gonna have this chance now to check your accuracy. Now, where do you make these corrections? In the classical blurting method approach, you would write these at the bottom of your paper. So for example, if your original blurt about Napoleon looks like this, that would be great, okay? But when you're done with your blurt, you would go to your textbook or your notes or Google or whatever and find what you missed. And you might find that you missed some key details, which you would add to your blurt. And like I said, one suggestion is to do this at the bottom of your paper in a separate box, like you see here. Or you could just add it to the blurt itself. So that takes us to step 5, which is to study what you missed. So let's say that you finish your blurt, right? And you're like, oh cool, I know, like 75% of what I'm supposed to know about Napoleon. I'm gonna walk away now, like that's pretty good. No, that means you're gonna get a 75 on the test if you're lucky, right? That's 25% of things that you either got wrong or you missed. So that's the stuff that you have to study. So the blurting method doesn't end at the blurt. So for this step of the blurting method, you have a couple options for how to go and study that material, which of course you must do using only active recall methods. And let me remind you that the blurting method is just one tool of your whole toolbox of study methods. So the blurting method is awesome, right? It can be used as part of the Feynman technique, can be used in conjunction with other strategies, which you should be doing, because the more study methods we use, the better we understand the material. Does that make sense? And the blurting method is just one tool, but some jobs require more than one tool. I think you know what I'm saying. So when you're done with your blurt and you realize there's some information that you don't yet know, you have to study it. How do we do that? Couple suggestions. I'll start with the most basic. You can make flashcards. Yes, flashcards are so simple, but they are so effective. They are like the ultimate original active recall study technique. So you wouldn't make flashcards for everything on your blurt. You would make flashcards for only the things that were in that box on the bottom of your sheet if you did it that way, or only the information that you got wrong or missed. You could make a quiz for yourself. I have a tutorial, yes, I'll leave it in the description box, for how to make quizzes with the right type of question. You could go really simple and just write out the concepts over and over and over again. If you're kinesthetic or you have visual preferences, because repetition is the key to learning, right? So just write whatever it is that you missed over and over and over again. Or, this is a good one, you could also teach it to somebody. That's a classic active recall study method, because as we try to teach someone else the material, we're forcing ourselves to consolidate and distill these big concepts into a way that somebody else would understand it. And if we can't do that, that means we don't understand it well enough. So that's the ultimate test of, do you know something, is can you explain it to somebody else? All 4 of those things that I just listed, so flashcards, making quizzes for yourself, writing out the concepts over and over again without checking your notes, and then teaching it to somebody else, all of those are active recall study methods. I'm going to repeat this because I think it's important. The blurting method is fantastic to use at the beginning of a study session and at the end of a study session to track your progress. It's great to use at the beginning of an entire study process, right? Let's say if you're going to study over 5 days, use it on day 1 and use it on day 4. And it's also fantastic as step 3 of the Feynman technique. It pairs beautifully with active recall, spaced repetition, mind mapping, flashcards, just like I said, just one tool, one study method in your study toolbox. And also, I said this before, I think it's awesome that you're watching this video looking for alternative ways to study, right? Because you want to change, you want something to be different. But if you don't take the strategies that you learn here and actually try to implement them, even if it's not perfect in the beginning, then you're going to stay where you are. So promise me that you will try this study method in the next week, because if you wait any longer than that, then you're going to forget the steps. And then you're going to say, oh, I'm going to have to go back and rewatch that video. And will you? I mean, I hope so, but I want you to not have to do that. Okay, so as always, thank you so much for watching, and never stop learning.